A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
As you might know, pre-poll voting is already happening. The federal election is on May 3rd, so it's closing in quickly. But where are things at on commitments from both sides to religious freedom and freedom of speech? Well, there are some developments we can talk about with some public statements coming from the major parties. Mike Southon leads Freedom for Faith. They're behind the more than 35 Meet the Candidate forums being held around the nation. Mike, a special welcome back to 2020.
Thanks, Neil. Great to be with you.
Mike, let us in on what's been going on with the major parties and commitments around religious freedom. There's been statements released by both sides.
Yes, so heads of faith sent letters to both major parties and the Greens asking them for a series of questions on religious freedom. And Labor and the Coalition have responded to that letter with their own statements and answers to some of those questions. And both of them have provided some quite comforting commitments on high-level issues of religious freedom.
Just at a time when we might have all been thinking religious freedom is on the back burner and our political leaders are not talking about it. And when we talk about leaders' debates and such things, very little is being discussed in this way. Let me in on what both sides say about religious freedom here.
Well, one of the key questions was, will you make a commitment that religious freedom will not go backwards under your government? And both parties, using the language of the letter, both replied saying, Labor said legal protections for people of faith will not go backwards under Labor. The Coalition said that religious Australians will not go backwards and freedom for religion will remain a cherished right in Australia. So at a high level, both parties saying that they are going to be protecting core religious freedoms.
Okay, will not go backwards, and that reiterates what you've worded in the question, or what the church leaders worded in the question, but will not go backwards. It sounds like there's a collaboration on the issue. Are they basically on the same page by making commitments that say we won't let things go backwards?
No, I would say not necessarily on the same page. I think the statements that came from the Coalition were a bit stronger and a bit clearer in their clear support of faith-based schools and faith-based organisations being able to employ based on what we believe. Labor, however, their key point was that they want any legislation that goes forward on these issues to be bipartisan. So perhaps they don't have internally it's the same strength of support for religious freedoms, but they're saying they're not going to do anything on their own or in coalition with the Greens. They're going to wait until they can work with heads of faith and work with the Coalition and come up with an agreement. So in both cases, different parties having a bit different philosophies, both of them actually giving us some fairly comforting statements.
The idea of bipartisan support for religious freedom, and especially how that affects religious schools, the idea that might happen seems a little bit like it's too idealistic. Any thoughts from you around that? Because just saying we're waiting for bipartisanship on this, because very rarely does this sort of stuff attract a bipartisan focus.
Yes, absolutely. And this was the line that the Labor government have been using for the past 3 years. They got recommendations from the Law Reform Commission that would have gutted faith-based schools. They wrote their own religious discrimination bill, which the feedback is it wasn't really great. So their response was, okay, we're not going to go forward unless we have bipartisan support. And so they began negotiations with the Coalition, which very quickly broke down with acrimonious accusations from both sides. But what it meant was we wanted to be bipartisan, so the result was pretty much nothing happened. But where we are predominantly with religious freedom, sometimes nothing happening is better than something happening. No legislation is really better than getting bad legislation. So I think what we're looking down the track of for the next 3 years, most likely is slow progression about discussions about religious freedom rather than any rapid development of legislation.
I guess when we think of the words will not go backwards, that is a little bit ambiguous, isn't it? It's so open-ended that one particular position might be it is taking you backwards, but the spin might mean it's we're not going backwards. There's a little bit of ambiguity there, isn't there, in using that terminology?
Yes, there is. And it was actually a direct quote from the Prime Minister from a year ago when he said, religious freedom will not go backwards while I'm Prime Minister. So that was just a phrase that has been picked up in the language of the discussion. But there were very specific and detailed requests in the Heads of Faith letters, and neither party really engaged with the detailed questions, and neither party has committed to bringing forward a religious discrimination bill in the way that we're asking for. The commitments are more easily interpreted as saying they're not going to do things that will further undermine our religious freedom, rather than seeing an advancement of protection of religious freedom. And I'd say that's, again, the coalition, I think, gave slightly stronger commitments, but I think that's fair to say from both parties that they're not chomping at the bit to advance religious freedom.
The connection between religious freedom and freedom of speech, there's an obvious connection when you think about what you think and what you say and what you believe. There's been some more statements too around freedom of speech. How do you reflect on those?
Yeah, it was really interesting. We were asked both parties, will they protect freedom of speech? And both of them replied saying, yes, we protect freedom of speech, but it's got to stay within the. So the coalition phrase was it must remain within the framework of Australian law. The Labor talked about allowing people to live free from violence or threat of violence. So their responses, both parties' responses to our question about freedom of speech, was to very quickly pivot to talking about the limits that exist with freedom of speech. And fair enough, there are limits to freedom of speech. I cannot incite hatred. That I cannot incite violence. Fair enough. But neither party actually really gave a strong commitment to how they were going to maintain religious, particularly freedom of religious speech. Although the coalition did call it a cherished right.
Okay, and when you use the terminology within the framework of Australian law, well, our governments make the laws. So that doesn't necessarily mean there is any sort of watertight freedoms that are being protected. It just means there's Australian law and we're going to make the laws and you'll abide by whatever we say, which might not give us a whole lot of confidence.
So these commitments that we've got from both parties really are demonstrating that they are understanding that this is a concern, that they are starting to engage with us, but they still really don't quite get it. And so this is more positive, I believe, and I feel this is a far more positive set of commitments and conversation than we've had in previous elections. So I think there is some significant progress in parties' understanding and in their talking to us, but this is a step along the way. It is a continuation of us slowly demonstrating to both major parties that this is something they're going to have to engage with consistently in the long term.
Mike, you've been hosting a whole lot of Meet Your Candidate forums all around the nation. There have been all sorts of politicians and candidates. They've been facing questions from people who are running those forums and from people who are on the floor, people just turning up at various church organisations to be able to be part of these. Is there something happening in those that you can give us some level of confidence that candidates are addressing some of these issues?
Yes. So we've got churches and Christian schools across the country who are holding these candidate forums. And candidates from both sides have been coming and sitting MPs from both sides. And in fact, a number of frontbenchers, Labor ministers, coalition shadow ministers have been turning up to theirs. So the parties have been taking these very seriously. The answers that they've been given are pretty much in line with the written commitments, because that's how things go. Head office gives a script, people follow the script. The lasting impression, though, of how many people were in the room is going to be one of the most important parts of these forums. When an MP comes out of the room saying, there was 200-something people there. That was the biggest forum I've been to. I didn't realise that the church could mobilise this many people. I didn't realise this many people were concerned about religious freedom. That stays with them. And so when the issue comes up and then the local minister phones them and says, hi, I want to talk to you about this new bit of legislation, they take it far more seriously. So it's about building this ongoing relationship between the Christians of the electorate and their elected MP so that they can have this ongoing conversation. So, yeah, there have been some very comforting things being said by a few MPs, but the most exciting thing is that this is the first time that so many churches have been doing this in a coordinated way. And this sort of unprecedented movement amongst churches is what's going to stay with our politicians for the next 3 years.
It makes a difference, doesn't it, when there's a crowd that are present and they're all interested in the politics. And I imagine there'll be some who are thinking of a little old rickety church with a few people turning up, but you've actually got some pretty substantial venues, haven't you, all around the nation?
Yeah, there are a couple of large churches who really couldn't be described as rickety that are holding forums, and a number of Christian schools who are hoping to fill the school hall. So, yeah, some reasonably good venues that we're hoping to have quite a lot of people at.
All right, we're only a week and a half out from the election, and there's still a whole bunch of these forums still to go. What's your encouragement to listeners? If you know what's going on in your community, or they can even find out whether there is a Meet Our Candidates forum in their area. What's your encouragement for people to actually physically do something and get along to those?
Yes, find your local forum. It's you can find all the forums at meetyourcandidates.org.au. Find the one that's closest to you. Go and turn up, ask questions, say hi to the MP. If you can't make one physically, go watch one online. And because those YouTube watch rates are also paid attention to. But get involved, have your voice heard.
All right, meetyourcandidates.org.au. And, of course, the website for freedomforfaith.org.au. You can also find a link there, /forums. But meetyourcandidates.org.au. Hey, good news in that there are some commitments that are being made by the major parties around issues to do with religious freedom and freedom of speech. And it's always good getting your insights too. Mike Southon, who leads Freedom for Faith. Mike, thanks so much for giving us this update today on 2020.
Thanks for the chat.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.